Hello, you're listening to Angelneers, the podcast. Angelneers is a Silicon Valley community for startup builders where founders and operators share their firsthand knowledge on how to build and scale startups. I'm your host, Oleg Kujakov, and our guest today is Artem Harutyunyan, co-founder and CTO of Bardeen, a no-code workflow automation tool that helps in managing repetitive workflow tasks across various applications. I'm excited to bring Artem on to talk about leveraging the browser-based approach that they use to bring workflow automation to the masses. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of the show, Artem, welcome.
Thanks, Oleg. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you, and we'd love to learn a little bit about your background. So let's get started there. Tell us, what did you do before you were an entrepreneur?
I worked at two startups in Silicon Valley. One was called Mesosphere, and it was doing infrastructure engineering for data centers, building large-scale systems, clusters. So it was the heyday when everyone was moving from virtual machines to containers. Was a very exciting time. Before that, I worked at another company that's called Qualys. They do enterprise security software, and I was working there on a big data system for collecting and analyzing and correlating various security-related data from the customers. And before that, I was in a lab in Geneva called CERN, where again I worked on large-scale distributed systems. So my background is in basically that, like big data, compute, networking, everything that has to do with a lot of computers that need to do something in unison together.
Got it. You have a lot of industry experience before you kind of came on and decided to start a company and be an entrepreneur. Can you talk about when did you decide that you wanted to start a company as opposed to, kind of being a big part of running one?
Yeah, I always wanted to do that, and I was waiting for the stars to align. And I always felt like I have a lot to learn. And I know that, normally people just jump, head straight into the problem and try to figure it out on the fly. But for some reason, I always felt like, I have to learn and I have to feel ready. And I think it was a good decision. And especially the last company, Mesosphere, I joined right around when it was like Series B, about like 50 or so people, and it was a rocket ship. And it grew really fast, and it had some of the best kind of blue chip customers. And it gave me a huge exposure to not only the technology part the whole thing, but also to the business part. I got a lot of exposure into like sales, marketing, and product management and product marketing and all the intricacies of selling enterprise software to really large companies and so on. And it helped me build my network. And like I said, at some point, it was like pretty magical. The stars just aligned. It happened to happen during COVID when everyone was kind of hunkered down at their homes, but it happened. And so, yeah, that's how I switched to Bardeen and never looked back, honestly.
Yeah. Can you talk about what's changed in your life? This happened. You started this company in 2020. What's the biggest change you've noticed? Has there been a big change?
That's a great question. I think the biggest, it's not necessarily a change, a material change that you would notice, but with when you're an entrepreneur, when you're a founder, there is no escalation path. The buck stops with you. Whereas, where you're working at a company, you always have a boss, and you can escalate to the boss. I mean, I also have a boss. My co-founder is my boss. He's the CEO of the company, so technically he's my boss. But it's a completely different feeling. Where when you're working in a company, you don't necessarily have you have kind of limited authority and power to do things and whatnot. And that also means that, some problems you can just say, what, there's a problem. I'm happy to help you solve it, but this is not ultimately my responsibility. I feel like when you're at a startup as a founder, there is no such thing where you can wash your hands. Of course, I mean, there is separation of roles. There are some things that, there's other people obviously are responsible for, that things happen without me like being in the path or knowing about it. But the feeling is completely different. It's hard to explain, but I think I feel a much bigger weight on my shoulders.
I get it. You were there at the conception. You're kind of I think the buck stops analogy is a good one, right? It's like you're ultimately the one responsible for this thing versus like joining an organization. It's like making it versus joining it. So I think that made a lot of sense. Next, can you give me just like your standard elevator pitch for Bardeen?
Yeah, for sure. It's a browser-based workflow automation platform. So that's the very short version of it. So we allow to create workflows, or basically sets of actions. We call them playbooks, across various SaaS applications, and you can invoke those either manually by clicking on a shortcut, or they can run for you as a response to a certain event, like email arrival or some other trigger. It works in a browser. It leverages the fact that it is in the browser, and so it allows you to kind of seamlessly integrate things that normally would require more than one tool to do. So, for instance, we have a built-in scraper that can get data from the web, and then we have integrations, let's say, with like Notion or Airtable or Google Sheets, so you can combine different actions that you would otherwise do manually into one and run it.
Got it. So yeah, I could use your web scraper, and I could send whatever I'm scraping to like a note that I have in Notion or Excel or something like that.
You got it. Cool. Yes.
Okay. Well, sounds simple enough. Let's dive into it. I want to talk about like workflow automation first. Can you just give me like, what is it? What is I kind of get it, but yeah, can you describe it again? Workflow automation.
A lot of people who, I don't like this term, but like knowledge workers, I don't know what's a better term, but this is basically people who spend a lot of time in front of computer and they have to click on things and think about things. So those people, so basically like people who do sales, marketing, HR, product management, obviously like developers and designers as well. So what happens is that in their day, they spend a lot of time doing things that are repetitive and should be trivial for the computer to do. So imagine a recruiter. What normally a recruiter is paid for is to make a judgment whether a candidate is would be a good fit for a position that they're trying to fill, right? So let's say they browse LinkedIn or they browse GitHub and they try to find that candidate that would be a good match. And normally what happens is as they come through that list, they have to make a split-second judgment about whether or not this is an interesting candidate. But then they have to spend a lot of time copy-pasting information about that candidate from their internal spreadsheet, sending it to a hiring manager, writing an email to a candidate, responding to them, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a workflow. So there's like a sequence of steps that a professional needs to perform to achieve a certain goal. Now, the automation part of it is basically recognizing that in terms of time and energy spent, a lot of the actions can happen without the human involvement, right? So if you think about it, the recruiter is mainly paid to make this like split-second judgment about whether it would be a good candidate or not. But they spend the majority of their time doing menial, boring, repetitive work, like copy-pasting data from like one system to another and so on. And so the automation part of it is basically automating that part that can be automated, that like menial repetitive part, reducing it to a single click, or ideally like no click at all. But a lot of the workflows do still require a human judgment. So that's the automation aspect of it, where we kind of recognize that, okay, there is this part that can be automated, and try to reduce it to something that would take like minutes or tens of minutes to just a single simple click.
Can you talk about some of the common like use cases? I like this idea of a recruiter, and they have certain steps in their workflow that really should and can be automated. Can you come up with some other like common use cases for this?
Totally. So, for instance, one of our very early customers, he ran a marketing agency, and so he like a lot of his time he was spending basically doing lead generation, demand generation, right? And in his case, he would go on a website like Upwork and would look through, like every morning he wakes up, goes to Upwork, looks for all the job postings that would be relevant to him, and he needs to like comb through those, post those to an Airtable from which there is like this filtering going on, and then from those, after he gets the filtered list, he has to send like a proposal or like basically a templated email to people who posted that job to kind of bid for that job to try to win it. And so that's another example of the workflow, right? And this is something that we can and we did automate with Bardeen. Another example is that we had a person who ran one of the teams in the marketing department of a very well-known hardware kind of consumer hardware vendor, and his job, and he had a team of 5 people doing that. His job was basically to comb through all the websites, like retail websites, like Newegg or Best Buy that are selling their items, and make sure that the information is accurate, that like pricing is accurate, that all the listings are accurate. And this is another thing that we were able to automate with Bardeen and save him. We save him like several hours, him personally, every week by automating the workflow. Another example that comes to mind. This is something that I do all the time, and this is what a lot of product managers do all the time. When you receive feedback about your product, so it can be a feedback, or it can be a bug report, or it can be just like support. And so you get an email, and from this email, you have to basically turn this email into a Jira ticket or into a GitHub issue or something else that will be looked at and worked at. And this is another example where, we have you can create yourself a shortcut where, it takes an email and then basically turns it into a GitHub issue, and then sends a Slack message notifying the relevant team that like, hey, this new issue was added to the queue. Please take a look. So those sort of things that we kind of do without realizing how many times per day or per week or per month we repeat those same things, go to the same motion. Those are all trivially automatable. And people, humans, should not be wasting time doing the things that are trivially automatable. So the machine should do it for them. And that's the whole premise of Bardeen.
So we understand a couple of common use cases. And, one of the outcomes of automation workflow, like you mentioned, is freeing up time of the employees. What other kind of objectives can you achieve by, using this kind of automation and eliminating the human involvement?
Yeah, time savement is obvious and huge, because it means that like less people can do more things. But beyond that, if you think about it, you kind of codify your kind of institutional procedures, right? Because imagine if you have not one recruiter, let's say, but 5. It means that when they show up to work, you have to teach them, where is the spreadsheet that the information should go to, what fields should they copy, what is the template for the email, and so on and so forth. And all those things are kind of living, changing procedures. And chances are that across your, 5 recruiters, the work that they do will not be completely uniform. Well, by codifying that process, you eliminate, or not eliminate maybe, but you drastically reduce the chance of someone, overlooking something, forgetting something. So you increase the accuracy and decrease the chance of an error or omission or an overlook. The other aspect is that, and this is kind of an interesting thing that we noticed after we started Bardeen. We didn't think about this before, but if you think about it, people were talking about the Great Resignation. There is still, even with all the economic issues, there is still a very big labor shortage in the market. And I think the employee churn is at the highest, right? Meaning, like, people come and they work and they quit much faster than they used to, which means that anything that can help you onboard people faster and kind of transfer this institutional knowledge from the head of people to a system that is repeatable is going to be a win for you, right? Because it now means that, like, when someone shows to work, instead of having to onboard them for weeks to kind of, through your like Notion document maze or through your like Google Drive maze, and like teach them, oh, this document lives here. Oh, never mind. This has been this is an old version. We have a new version. Instead of doing all of that, you just give them a shortcut that's right there in their browser, and they actually spend the time that you pay them for doing the thing that we haven't yet figured out fully how to automate, which is to make this like split-second human judgment, and the rest is taken care of by the system, right? So your sales development representative, when they show up to work, when they're doing customer prospecting, they just need to like find the customer and then click a button, and everything else, all the data entering, all the massaging of the data and so on is taken care of for them. So that's a big win for everyone involved.
Yeah, I think a lot of us can relate to that kind of, I don't know what to call it, institutional knowledge or lack of organization when it comes to just the process and the workflows.
Yeah, and everyone hates learning those kind of things, right? Because like they don't make you a better professional. It's just idiosyncratic facts that you have to know to be able to do your job, but they don't make you smarter. They don't add any value.
Right. It's like, you didn't know it's a Confluence? It's a Confluence, not a Google Doc. Come on. It's like, okay. So you mentioned like it works in your browser. I want to hear more about how like workflow automation kind of looks and feels and works. Like if put me in the shoes of the user, how does it work from start to finish?
The way it works is like once you installed it. So, okay, let me just tell you about a typical user journey, like a new user journey, right? Like an unsuspecting user who doesn't know anything about Bardeen, who doesn't even know they need something like Bardeen. Normally, their journey starts with Google, right? They would go to Google and they would search something like, Amazon reviews to Google Sheet, right? Or let's say, let's pick that example. And then what happens is that they see Bardeen because, we have a blog post precisely about that. They go to the blog post where we tell them like, hey, actually, we have this automation built for you. We call them playbooks. And you can try it right away from your browser. So they click try it. And then, several clicks later, they have installed the browser extension. And when they click on that extension, it gives them a shortcut. And a shortcut says like Amazon reviews to Google Sheet. So they click the shortcut. And again, they have to obviously connect their Google Sheet account. They have to tell which sheet exactly they want the information to go to as a first step. But once they have done that, and it's really fast, it takes a few minutes at most to set up. Once they have done it, now they have a button, an extra button in their browser that they can click, and that will automatically copy. If they're looking at an Amazon page that has reviews, it will copy information, from that page to spreadsheet. Or so that's one example. Another example is that, like I mentioned, we have things where the human involvement is not necessary. So, for instance, one thing that I use all the time is this like meeting automation, where it is connected to my calendar. So 1 minute before my meetings are about to start, it would go open the meeting invite, figure out if it's a Zoom or a Hangout, or I think we even support Zencaster, and it will open the tab for me. And moreover, if that meeting invite has any other relevant links, like links to Notion, links to Google Docs, it will open those as well for me in the in separate tabs. So again, I'm spending this like 3 minutes before, and it's not just for me, like it's for my entire team, where like when the meeting starts, first of all, it minimizes the chance of me being late because the tab is in my face. I'm like, oh, I have a meeting, so I don't have to scramble for it. And yeah, I'm kind of basically showing up to meetings on time, and I'm ready. So those sort of things.
Yeah, I love it. You freed up your valuable employee time. You reduced the risk of showing up to the wrong meeting or human error. And I don't know if we hit our third objective there, but it's kind of like we discussed before. You're able to do a lot with this simple tool. I'm curious. So you mentioned the reviews to a spreadsheet workflow, and it sounds like that's like a playbook that existed. This kind of meeting prep tool, whatever you want to call it, did I want to hear more about like building something from scratch? Did you build that yourself? And what does that look like when, say, there's not like a path or a playbook already for this automation?
Yeah, great question. So we the Bardeen team, what we do, we integrate various products, right? Like right now we have integrated about 30 different products through their APIs. And of course, we also have a web scraper that allows to kind of interact with the web without any kind of API integration. But the idea is as follows. So for instance, when we integrate Google Calendar, we create these small actions, and actions are like very simple and not super valuable by themselves. Like, find next meeting, open all links from the next meeting, open the meeting link from the next meeting, and so on. And so within the product, and when you're absolutely right. So when you download the product, you have a catalog of playbooks that's readily available for you. It's categorized. You can search it. You can find whatever like automation that we have pre-built for you. But more often than not, and this is also an interesting thing that we discovered, that like people have very similar workflows, but it's the emphasis on the word vary. They're not exactly the same, and so everyone would have a little twist. And so within the product, we have a visual. We call it a builder, where you can open a playbook, and every action is represented there as a box, and there are like arrows between boxes. So this like your favorite meeting example, like Joan meeting example, would have three boxes. The first box would be like find next meeting. The second box would be open like Zoom link for the next meeting, and the third box would be open all the other links from the meeting, something along those lines. So there is a visual editor in which you can go and either kind of customize or modify an existing playbook or build something from scratch on your own. And this is, it's pretty simple. We went through very great lengths to make sure that this builder is extremely simple, that we don't show the nuts and bolts of the APIs. People don't have to deal with like JSON or God forbid XML or any of the like anything. It's very visual, very intuitive, and we do a lot of the heavy lifting ourselves to make sure that our users have an intuitive and a delightful experience.
Talk about the main challenges. What main challenges does the software automation industry have to overcome?
I think the biggest challenge, and it's a bit counterintuitive, is the fact that a lot of the people do not recognize how much of the work that they do is actually automatable. Like you asked about, like, what is a workflow? It's not obvious at all for a lot of people, because like if you ask them, they will say like, no, my work is I spend a lot of kind of brain cycles. It's not super repetitive, but if you have someone kind of looking over your shoulder, they can and they look over your shoulder for sufficient amount of time, let's say a week. After a week, they will be able to tell you like how many times have you did you have to repeat yourself. And I think one of the biggest challenges is like people not recognizing that simple fact that like we spent a lot of time basically serving different computer systems, right? Like I'm basically sitting there translating from like LinkedIn data schema from like, the layout of LinkedIn to the layout of Google Sheets, right? And I'm a human being, presumably an intelligent one, and I'm sitting there just like, copy pasting from one box to the other to make the machine happy. That just fundamentally, that makes no sense. That's not what computers were made for. But there's the problem of kind of recognizing that and seeing that, like noticing this repeating patterns. And then the second problem is that kind of the cost of creating an automation, right? Like the effort that you have to make to create this automation oftentimes kind of may outweigh the benefit, right? Because a lot of the very popular tools, the ones that are simple are super limited, and the ones that are not simple come with like a Capgemini consultant that charges $750 an hour to make it work for you, right? And so these are, I think, the two kind of important trends that we recognize. So like people not understanding how much of it is automatable, and tools not doing what we think they should be doing. Those are the two main problems that we're trying to fix. And this is, by the way, where the AI comes into play. Because the whole idea of Bardeen was not just to create this automation platform, but to have this person overlooking your shoulder be not a person, but another program. And basically, that is also the idea why we thought it was so important to be on the edge inside the browser, because that's where the work happens. And so by being in the browser, we kind of solve a few problems at once. First of all, it's kind of privacy preserving, meaning we don't need to see all that you're doing. We don't like on the cloud, because we can generate suggestions inside your browser and without like your data having to leave your computer. And secondly, we can kind of, again, the work happens in the browser. And if you look all of the existing systems, they live in the cloud. And so it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense if you think about it, that there are kind of like legacy traditional tools that are focused on automating the kind of the desktop, so to speak, that are not super intelligent. You just like tell them where to click and they click. And, there are tools that help you like automate processes with like no human involvement at all. They live on the cloud, but there is nothing in between. And Bardeen is the thing that we believe should exist at this sweet spot where like user work actually happens.
Yeah, so that's kind of like a question that I had for later. One, like how does AI fit into it? But we answered that. The one about the edge, like why you mentioned, you're a lot of the competition, or you didn't say competition, but I'll say a lot of your competition does this in the cloud. Why We've talked about edge computing on the podcast. I love to like learn about this, but like, why was that a decision you made when designing this technology? Like, why edge over cloud? Can you like explain that a little bit more?
I mean, there are many reasons. The most important reason is that I think by being inside the browser, you get the most exposure to what the user is actually doing without compromising their privacy. Meaning, browsers, people don't recognize this, but like browsers over the past 2 decades really evolved into this super sophisticated platforms that have, their own everything, that they have their own language runtimes and their own whole databases inside the browser, and it's a super powerful but also super insulated platform. And so the users are becoming more, and of course, I mean, in theory, you can upload all the data from the browser to the cloud and do all the processing there, but probably people are not going to be happy with it, right? Because the trend is to, share less data, upload, less and less stuff. And so this is why we thought that, like, instead of trying to force users to kind of expose what they're doing and give us the information, we can go to them. And why is it important to know all that? Because if we want to learn about their patterns and if we want to suggest them automations on the fly, we have to see what they're doing so that we can mine for those patterns, and we can see those patterns and turn them into automations. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect, which has less to do with users and more to do with business, if you think about it, I think a lot of the businesses today, if you look, are spending some obnoxious amounts of money on the cloud, right? I remember, when Snapchat was going public, I think their cloud spend, so they had a deal with Google, and back in the day, I was basically I was in cloud computing business, so I was following that. But I think they were saying that they were going to spend I think $5 billion or something like that over the course of several years on Google Cloud, and they had to call it out in their S1. So I mean, cloud is there. Cloud is amazing. It's it helps you move so quickly, but it's also super expensive. So from the business point of view, if we can kind of outsource the computation that you would normally do on the cloud to the user's machine, which by the way are underutilized anyway, it is a big win for us from a business point of view, right? Because our cloud bill is going to be nothing compared to what other people in the industry are doing, meaning we will have much better margins, meaning we will be able to offer a much better price to our customers. But second aspect, which is not less important, is the privacy aspect. And so I think Edge is very, from that point of view, I think Edge is kind of, very interesting. The reason why a lot of the people are not doing that is because I think it's so much harder to developing something in a browser. I think is way much harder than developing something on a cloud, where you basically own your resources, you have full access to everything, you're not sandboxed. It's browser is a super restrictive environment compared to a virtual machine in a cloud. So there is a cost, but we always think, if there's a cost that we can bear instead of kind of outsourcing it to the user, we will do that. Because I think at the end of the day, it will be a better setup for our users. So that's kind of the thinking that we basically went through when deciding to build Bardeen the way we built it.
Let's move on to the origin story. We spent a lot of time talking about the market, and I even had more questions, believe it or not. But I want to spend some time on how the company got started. Yeah, what was the impetus for the starting a company?
Yeah, so for me, it was I was working at my previous company called Mesosphere, and I was running quite a sizable product and engineering organization. At one point, I realized that most of my time I'm doing menial tasks like, follow up on something, remind someone to, do their presentation, follow up on a customer ticket. And I always, I kind of in the back of my mind, I always noticed that in order to kind of move forward in your career, do more things, I always try to automate myself out of my job. And, I was at a state where, like, again, I recognize that like 60 or 70% of the things that I'm doing and spending my time on, a mildly sophisticated Python script should do. And so I thought, like, maybe I should start writing that script instead of something else, to see like how much of my work I can automate away. And so basically, I started moonlighting, and I decided to do a Slack bot I called it Mini Me. Basically, it was like a bot that people wouldn't even know that it's a bot. It would just like send messages on my behalf. And, I felt like a very big portion of my job could be outsourced to that bot. And so I started moonlighting. And then, long story short, I met my co-founder who had exactly the same idea. And it was kind of this eerie, very weird conversation that we had, where I thought that he was in my head and he thought that I was in his head, because we were like finishing each other's sentences, and he had exact same idea, and he was working on the very similar thing that he called me.ai. Like even the names were, because he was in a similar situation. He was running a pretty large engineering organization, and being an engineer himself, he was kind of sad that he doesn't have time to code and build cool stuff, and he like has to spend all day kind of chasing people and making sure that like processes are right and whatnot. And so, yeah, we hit it off. We spent a few months kind of talking about it, prototyping. And then we started Bardeen, raised a seed round, and hit it off.
So while we're here, you've been around for at least, I want to say at least 2 years now, right? You started in 2020 at some point.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
What are some of the milestones that you're most proud of from then to today?
Obviously, I'm most proud of kind of the amount of or just the number of users that we're able to save time for and actually kind of touch and make more productive. I think, just in terms of milestones, I think hitting 1,000 users was pretty big, and it happened actually less than a year ago. And then we launched on Product Hunt in February. I think this launch was fantastic. It was one of the most successful launches ever. It was like super warm reception. I'm super proud of our community. So we have I think by now more than 1,000 people in our Slack community, and people are helping each other, and of course we're helping them. But it's amazing to see how people are kind of can help each other without our involvement. They're like people who are offering other people to make money, like Bardeen gigs, like, can you build this playbook for me? So a lot of amazing things have happened in the past few years, and I'm sure that trend will continue, and there will be even more great things to talk about in the future.
How about timing? So we mentioned like some of the challenges. One of them is not really understanding that your workflows are automatable. Those challenges still exist. So although this is a challenging space, why do you think the timing is right now for this workflow automation to kind of take off?
Well, I mean, several things. I think kind of the development of technology is one thing, right? Like all the advancement of AI that we have seen with large language models, with deep learning, and so on. I mean, things like that were not possible 10 years ago. The thing that I mentioned with browsers, like doing something like we're doing today, again, doing it 10 years ago would have been practically impossible because the technology wasn't there. I think another kind of big shift is this everyone kind of changing to remote work and like understanding, okay, I mean, we suck at preserving institutional knowledge, which affects our business, meaning how can we do that? How can we codify things that normally people would kind of carry in their heads and kind of transfer from one person to another in the workforce. The other thing right now is I think we're in the economic downturn. We're hearing about a lot of layoffs, a lot of kind of workforce optimizations, and of course, in that kind of environment, people are looking for things that would allow them to do more with less. And I think those are all kind of tailwinds, some things that kind of propel us forward. And there have been kind of big successes, several companies in the space like doing an IPO. So I think there is also a recognition from the market about kind of importance of this and understanding of the value. So I think like timing wise, it's a really, we didn't necessarily time it ourselves. I think we started it because we were passionate about it and we had our own itch to scratch. But when we kind of looked closer, it turned out that timing is very much in our favor.
Can you talk about your ideal customer? And before you do that, like one question I have is this for, like, I understand how individuals can use this. I kind of understand why it's useful for organizations, right? We talked about that, like sharing of institutional knowledge, and it can be very useful to the organization to have a tool like this available. But is the vision for like a company to like basically license this software and everyone gets to use it and we kind of train everyone and look to automate whatever you can and we'll kind of automate processes? Or is it really for like an individual to buy and then start using and does that make sense? Like, is it for the individual or the organization?
Yeah, it makes total sense. I think if you think about it, like think of Dropbox, how Dropbox started, right? Like it started as something that like people used for their own need, but then they kind of brought it to the work. And here and I think a lot of products these days kind of do that. There is we're in the kind of prosumer niche, meaning we're not marketing to companies or to IT departments or like, the VPs as of right now. All our efforts are directed toward the individual contributors. But what's happening, and we see this happening with a lot of the companies that we have, that like once someone brings Bardeen into the organization, it starts to spread. First, it spreads within the group, and then it spreads into kind of adjacent groups and so on. So we are right now, like I said, we're focused on individual users, and we want to make their experience delightful. But the natural next step for development would be to add more features, like more team features, basically to facilitate sharing among the teams. I mean, right now we have features, for instance, for like sharing a playbook is really easy. It's just one click and you can share a playbook with anyone. But we also want to introduce like, admin features. We want to introduce like central control that, for instance, like a team manager would like to have possibly over playbooks. So the idea is that like we start at an individual level and then we go to the team level, and from there we kind of elevate to the enterprise level. I think this is there's nothing unusual. It's a very typical path for kind of prosumer products these days.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll kind of move to the end. I have one just big closing question. As a founder, what are some of the challenges that you face that keep you up at night?
That's a good question. I think, day to day, there are a lot of challenges that are, I don't want to, they're very tactical. Let's put it this way, right? And it's just the sheer amount is a lot. So that's a challenge in and of itself. I think on a higher level, having worked at a lot of startups, or like at a few startups myself, I've seen that, startups constantly have to kind of reinvent themselves and kind of graduate to the next level, doing things that are kind of counterintuitive and non-obvious. And so one thing that I constantly keep thinking about with my co-founder is that, like, okay, like we went from a few hundred users to, by now I think we're getting close to like 40,000 users in less than a year. And obviously that's a huge jump in a lot of things. And so what should we do differently? Like, what are and it's not only just engineering things, but it's also like communication and processes and whatnot. So one thing that keeps me up at night is how do we recognize this like natural evolution moments and respond to them in time. This space is very crowded and very popular for the reasons that we talked about. So there's obviously a lot of competition that we need to be aware of. So all those things are something that we need to pay attention to. But although I have to say I'm a very, very good at sleeping, I don't have insomnia, so that's so technically I'm not up at night, but those are all the things that we kind of tend to think about.
Okay, well, thank you for playing along with the question, even if you're not staying up late panicking about anything. Any last minute predictions for the future of workflow automation?
Yeah, I think this space is going to get even bigger. I think in 10 years from now, we will look back and things that seem normal today will seem completely weird, and we would be questioning ourselves, like, how come we were doing this? I think it's going to become even more pervasive. I think more and more products are introducing integrations as a first level things, and recognizing how important it is, and recognizing that users have to use a lot of different tools to accomplish their goals. And I think it's going to be amazing for users because it's developing very quickly. And I think the space is going to become even bigger, and we're going to have even better tools that are going to make us more productive.
Awesome prediction. Before we go, how about for the listeners, what's the best way to reach you and learn more about Bardeen?
Our website, bardeen.ai, that's Bardeen. We have a Slack community. My email is artem@bardeen.ai. So we're always happy to hear from users. We talk to them all the time. We're on Twitter at Bardeen.ai. We're on YouTube. We have an amazing channel with a lot of demos and kind of automation and productivity tips. All those channels, we're there.
All right, check it out. We're going to end the show there. If you liked it, please subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast and leave us a rating. Artem, thank you for joining the show today. We appreciate your time and your insights.
Thank you, Oleg.